Dodge this.
One world currency.
The New World Order.
Those are the roots of trouble.
I imagine that right now you're feeling a bit like Alice. Tumbling down the rabbit hole? Let me tell you why you're here. You're here because you know something. What you know you can't explain, but you feel it. You felt it your entire life. That there's something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there, like a splinter in your mind, driving you mad. It is this feeling that has brought you to me. This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. All I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.
For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed. But I am asking your help in the tremendous task of informing and alerting the American people.
And now, welcome to another episode of Down the Rabbit Hole. Here's your host from federaljack.com. It's Popeye.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another live edition of DTRH. It is February 10th, 2015. Tonight's live edition is going to be interesting. I'm welcoming back a friend. He'll be joining us shortly. A good friend of mine, retired Detective John Shirley. He's been on the broadcast before. We've done shows called Conversations with a Cop. That's what I'm doing tonight. Conversations with a Cop, episode numero quattro, with my good friend John Shirley. He is former detective and former homicide detective, not a quote-unquote drug warrior. I hate that term. We're going to be getting into the war on drugs as we normally do, police brutality and the like. So he'll be joining me shortly, a few short minutes. And when John comes on, we're going to get into that. There's a few other things I want to touch on first really quick. I'm really horrible at advertising my own stuff. It's not that I'm a bad radio host. I'm actually a very good radio show host, if I do say so myself. Pat myself on the back there a little bit. Hurt my arm doing so. No, I forget to promote stuff because I'm constantly not trying to make money or, I constantly just put out the information or talk. I don't even bother to try to promote things. So I want to take just a few minutes really quick and let you guys know. Federal Jack, if you don't know what Federal Jack is, when you hear in the beginning of my intro, it says now from federaljack.com. It's Popeye. Well, that's my website, federaljack.com. Federaljack.com. Really simple. Really easy to remember. If you go there, I have an archive section of all of my radio shows and any special broadcasts I've done, any radio shows I've been on in the past as a guest, and they're available for you to listen to. Now, there's a couple different ways you can listen to the radio show. You can listen either on YouTube, if they don't close the account again on me, which I'll get into in a minute. But you can either listen on YouTube, you can go to federaljack.com and listen directly from my server, or you can go to federaljack.com and download. Actually, I guess there's four ways, because you can also go to truthfrequencyradio.com and listen to the Truth Frequency archives. But if you go over to Federal Jack, you'll see there's a section that says DTRH with Popeye. If you click on that, each individual show is a post on the website. So each individual show is its own post. In that post, you can either use the embedded MP3 player that's there, you can share it on Facebook and Twitter, and then there's links to listen to it on YouTube or to go to the download section and download the free high-quality archive of the show. And I always cut out the commercial breaks. I mean, Truth Frequency doesn't really have any commercial breaks anyway. I mean, we have one at the bottom of the hour, one at the top of the hour. It's more so for the host to stretch his legs and go get a cup of coffee or whatever. But I cut all that out. So, straight, no commercials, no breaks, no nothing, straight through. All the archives are over there. Easy to remember link to get to it. federaljack.com/Popeye. I know, amazing, right? Very easy, very simple. federaljack.com/Popeye. That's the downloadable archive section. Just go there. You can either play it right from the server using like your browser, or certain players will just stream it, or you can download it to your device, which is what I really suggest you do. Download the shows. That's why they're there. Take them. Who knows how long this stuff will be up on the internet for free anyway, right? So it's free knowledge. You might as well take it and use it. So go over to federaljack.com/Popeye, and you can download any of the broadcasts I've done. There's got to be close to 600. Maybe there's over 600 broadcasts in there now. I don't even remember how many I've done. It's been that long and so many. So that, and the other thing is, I know people are constantly trying to ask, how can they email me? Because I never give out an email address. There's a reason for that, because I have like 15 different email addresses. And over the years, I've given out different ones, and then it's kind of hard for the fans to have one specific email to go to. So a while ago, I made just a Gmail account. The email account over at Federal Jack, I have turned off right now. So I'm going to end up using that again eventually and get that thing back up and running. But for right now, the easiest way to contact me, if any of you want to reach out to me, questions, comments, thoughts on shows I've done, news tips. By the way, it doesn't mean I'm going to instantly if you recommend a guest, I'm not going to instantly get that person on. So don't get all, your feelings all hurt if I don't get the person on right away. But I will take, if you know of a guest that might be interesting, it doesn't hurt to shoot me an email and tell me. So, no, I don't have time to respond to every single email I get. I do read them all, though. I do read them. I see them. I may not respond to all of them, but I will see them eventually. And I don't have a team that does it myself. I actually go through all this stuff myself. That's why I don't have the time to actually respond to every single one of them. Once in a while, I do respond to an email, depending on what it is. But anyway, that email address is real simple. It's PopeyeDTRH@gmail.com. Again, PopeyeDTRH@gmail.com. Very, very simple to remember. Easy. If you want to get in touch with me, you want to email me, whatever, just hit me up there. Again, comments, questions, suggestions. Maybe you have a suggestion for a future guest or whatever. I'm very open and willing to listen to suggestions. In fact, there's been a couple times where people have suggested, hey, go check this video out or something. This might interest you. And it actually leads to me getting the person who did the video or the person that's being interviewed on as a guest. So it does help. I appreciate it. So don't be afraid to email me. Like I said, I will read them. I may not respond to you, but that doesn't mean that I didn't read them and that I don't appreciate the conversation or the input. So with that said, there's all of my advertising. The first 9 minutes of the show. Well, the first 2.5 minutes is my intro. Then the other 6.5 was that. So I mentioned YouTube. I want to give you guys an update. And this update is because every time this happens, it's just a reminder as to how fast stuff could get taken down. So the other day, the archive channel, the DTRH archive channel, which never, ever gets screwed with, I may add. Okay? Ever. Because I just don't put things up there. I don't upload clips from other people. Everything up there is original. The only thing that's up there that's not original that I didn't make is what in the world and why in the world are they spraying? Which Michael Murphy, who I had on last week, is a very close friend of mine. And he asked me to host both the videos on there. So I did. But I did not. I have not uploaded other stuff. Everything on there is original content, or radio shows and stuff that I've been on, the podcast of such radio broadcasts. So the other day, about 3 or 4 days ago, I was working, and I think it was like Friday night, and I go to log in, and or I was already logged in, and I go to refresh the page on YouTube. And I get the pink screen of death, which is, you've gotten a warning. Usually it's a copyright strike. Well, mine wasn't a copyright strike. In my case, it was a community guideline strike. Somebody, and I think this was one of the YouTube super moderators that did this, the ones that can just click a button and do whatever they want and have your video taken down. And if there's been people caught already abusing this function. So in the message, it says that the video violated the community guidelines of commercially deceptive material or spam. Commercially deceptive material. I don't have commercials in my radio show. I don't sell anything. I don't hawk any goods on air. How am I commercially deceptive? So what broadcast was it that piqued their interest? I'll give you a guess. What would be the most ironic broadcast you could possibly picture them picking out to censor? That's right, ladies and gentlemen. The episode I did 2 weeks ago with Alex Hyde and Black Days from DEF CON on internet freedom and the future of the internet. So the irony of this whole thing is that your freedom to have access to this information was compromised by YouTube. Now, I mean, that may not really sound like a big deal, right? But think about the irony of the situation. We're talking about big corporations working in conjunction with the government to censor the internet and stifle what you have access to. And then said big corporation stifles said radio show on its own platform. I could not make this up. I couldn't write this for parody. I really couldn't. I couldn't. I couldn't make this up if I tried. The irony. Anyway, pissed me off a little bit. So, what do? Well, first I appeal the decision, right? Now, mind you, usually community guideline strikes do not take away your full-length upload capabilities. Because the only reason I use that archive channel is for the radio show in its entirety. So I appealed the decision. I had all my stuff still. I could upload full-length videos. I checked it, double-checked it, took screenshots of it. Everything was hunky-dory. Everything was okay. Until I appealed the decision with YouTube. As soon as I appealed the decision, I don't know if it was as a form of punishment, but as soon as I appealed the decision, my upload capability of longer than 15 minutes was automatically taken away. All of my other perks on the network that you get with the channel were taken away. I couldn't appeal any content ID matches. I couldn't do anything. And then I was told by YouTube that they reviewed it and that I did violate community guidelines and that they were going to keep the video removed. And not only was the video going to be removed, but now I was forbidden from uploading anything over 15 minutes for at least 6 months as punishment. I was pissed, to say the least, because the video didn't obviously violate any community guidelines. It's just a podcast of my radio broadcast. Right? Long story short, I had to spend the entire day hunting down emails, contact numbers, calling people at Google, calling random numbers. Some of them didn't answer, or most of them didn't answer. Sending out emails. Some didn't work, some did, but I never got a response back. But I just kept inundating the emails. I kept hammering YouTube customer service as much as I could. I kept annoying them with appeals. Finally, I must have irritated them, whatever, but I got my channel back. It took me all day and 2 decisions. The initial decision was that I did something wrong, and then they sent me another email saying, oh, we were wrong. Oopsie daisy. Now, I bring this up because it's just very interesting that they attacked that broadcast. They didn't attack any other of the podcasts that I have up there. There's almost 600 shows on that channel. They didn't attack anything else. They attacked the one about internet freedom and what they're doing, and about the amendments to the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. That ought to be enough to tell you that they don't want you to know what we were discussing, and they don't want you to look further into it because they just want to control the internet. It's about the control of information. That's what it's about. It's about the control of the free flow of information being completely and utterly stifled. That's what it's about. 110%. Okay? It's unfortunate, but that's the truth. It's about shutting down communication. It's about not allowing you people to hear what I have to say or to hear what my guests have to say. That's what it's about. And it's not just me, it's other people. Change the channel too. He just got hit again. And this time they removed, it's one of the Alex Jones movies that he hosts on his network. They just hit his channel again with a copyright strike again, and they removed it. Usually they don't remove the video. They might block it until he can appeal it, and then it always gets released because he has full permission from InfoWars and Jones to upload all that stuff. They've been up there for years. But it's a third party that what they do is they use a rant from the beginning of Terror Storm in their songs, and then they copyright it. And because YouTube being YouTube, it's just a computer. It's not a human being. It's a computer that does that. It just says, "Oh, you match this algorithm." Boop, and that's it, done, and goodbye. It'll remove it. Now, there's also the super mods, which I think had something to do with what I was going through. And they've been caught before. They've done it to other people like Stefan Molyneux, who, and by the way, that doesn't mean just because I bring him up, oh well, I either dislike him or I like him. Okay, that's a side issue. I'm not even promoting anybody. I'm just saying his channel got attacked too. Same way other people's have. In fact, he postulated, could it have been a super mod? And then people complained, people bitched. They went and did videos on YouTube. People sent emails, made phone calls to whoever they could call. And within like 24 hours, Stefan got his YouTube channel back. So you have super mods that can run around at a whim. And just, if they don't like what you have to say, and it doesn't mean, remember, it doesn't mean that they're part of the Illuminati or anything like that, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, they're maybe they're part of the Council of 300. No. They just have to be a useful idiot. And they feed off the propaganda they're given. They go do what they're told to do, and they hit a delete button. And that's it. So I bring this up because it reminded me, you get sidetracked with all this other stuff. Life has been kind of interesting for me, to say the least, right? So you get sidetracked with everything. You forget. You just get used to having the YouTube channel. Oh, I'll upload it. So having them screw with me the other day made me think of this again. What I want everybody to do, at least with my channel, and I suggest you do this with others as well, because this is how we're going to save the internet. Go get free download programs, the YouTube downloaders. Okay, there's tons of them. Just type in YouTube downloader into Google. There's a ton of free software you can get. Get it and start to download all of these radio shows. Go to my channel, rip every video that's on my channel. Go to Federal JackTube 6, my other channel, rip every video there. Federal JackTube 4, go there. Federal JackTube, go there. Go to every YouTube channel I have, every one. Go to every YouTube channel of every radio show host that you appreciate and you think does a good job. Rip their stuff. Hosts, don't get pissed if someone rips your stuff from your YouTube channel and re-uploads it to theirs. It's not about clicks. It's not about monetization. It's about getting the truth out. At this point, it's a fight between ignorance and information. Truth versus fiction. Their fiction. Their version of history. Okay? I don't feel like living in their crazy, insane world. The only way it's going to stop is if everybody is awake and aware as to what's going on and realizes their true potential. And the only way that's going to happen is if the information is flowing freely. So, to avoid their censorship, go get YouTube downloading software and rip all of my radio broadcasts on YouTube. Rip them. I don't care. Re-upload them to your channel. As long as you put links to the original DTRH archive channel and you use the description that I put in there and everything, I don't care. I don't care. As long you're not, it's not like you're going to be able to pretend that it's your radio show. It's not your radio show, obviously. Trust me, there's enough stuff on there that says it's Popeye. Take the shows and re-upload them, ladies and gentlemen. If my channel goes dark, all that stuff will still be out there. They can't stop it. That's how we beat this. That's how I beat this back in the day. That's how I fought. That's one of the reasons I have so many channels, is because they would shut one down, I'd build another. They'd shut one down, I'd build two more. Well, I can't keep building them all on my own. Now, all of you are awake. So go out there, rip all my shows, re-upload them. Rip other people's shows that are out on YouTube and re-upload them. Hosts, don't get pissed if people do that. You should take it as a compliment. They appreciate what you're saying. Look at it for what it is. That's how we'll beat this. That's how we'll stop this shutdown of information. Anyway, John is with us, ladies and gentlemen. So I want to get into tonight's topic. I've pontificated enough. I did my opening monologue there. I went over everything I wanted to cover really quick, because that's what's been going on since I last spoke to you last Thursday. And by the way, make sure you tune in this Thursday. My good friend Mark Passio, good friend of the broadcast, good friend of mine personally, is going to be coming back to the broadcast to hang out with us for 2 hours to get into the occult, freedom, and so much more. I'm going to pick his brain about... I'm going to throw my answer, my solution that I usually give to you guys out there at him and see what he thinks. Mark's a smart guy and a good friend of mine. I really appreciate his take on things. So make sure you tune in Thursday. Anyway, without wasting any more time, ladies and gentlemen, we've got about 4.5 minutes before the break sneaks up here on us. So we have the last few minutes of this segment and then another hour and a half with my guest tonight, my good friend, former, I still like to call him Sergeant John Shirley, because he's always going to be the Sarge to me. But the Sarge is now a retired police officer and allowed to speak a little bit more freely on the broadcast than he used to. Although he always spoke freely. He was just, John was smart to make sure he didn't step in it. Anyway, without wasting any more time, I want to introduce him. For those of you that don't know him, and those of you that do, let's give a big welcome back to my good friend, Sergeant John Shirley. John, welcome back, brother.
Hey, Popeye, it's good to talk to you.
Long time no chat. It's been too long, dude. I've been wanting to get you back on for...
like 6 months.
Yeah, it's been way too long. I've been wanting to get you on for a while now. So first, let's start off with the obvious. As I said, you're now a retired police officer. Last time you were on, you were still active duty. You are retired. So I want to pick your brain. You could speak from both standpoints, obviously, but I want you to feel free. Obviously, you know how my broadcast is, to go ahead and speak as freely as you want. Whatever comes across your mind, go ahead and let it just flow out. You don't have to filter it. So the first thing I want to ask you is, now that you're not a police officer, now that you're more of a civilian, you can speak a little bit freer. What do you think about the insanity with these cops just going nuts? I mean, the last time I had you on, we talked about police brutality, but it's gotten way out of control since the last time I talked to you. So, thoughts?
Well, the upsetting part is, I mean, even 6 months or a year ago, when someone would bring up a case of police brutality, everyone knew what it was because the news channels had time to cover it. But it seems like, fast forward over the last 6 months especially, it just seems like the instances of the videos you see online and reports of it are so numerous that it all gets lost in the haze, that there's no one individual case that can stand out at any given time, because honestly they just come so hard and fast these days. It's disconcerting, because it's a shame that we can't give each one the due attention that it needs before the next one comes, and then the next one, and the next one.
It's not even, it used to be, I remember there would be like an incident, and then it'd be like a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks before you had another one. or at least one that was like big enough. You know what I mean? That it was so big that it got attention. Now it's to the point where, I mean, I know this stuff happens every day, but I mean, you even know there's been an uptick in this, and like it's getting to the point where it's really out of control, wouldn't you say?
Yes. I mean, it's even for someone who's a civil libertarian like myself, it seems like every day on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter, there's another video. And I've even gotten to the point myself where I don't stop and look at every single one because it just further enrages me that it's gotten so pervasive, and that the politicians want to say they're against it, but you know what? They never make any changes to stop it. They never change their policies. They never change their training, and it seems like these guys are never really held accountable for it. I mean, look at the guy that was smothered to death in New York. You know, and they decided not to charge the officers. I mean, how much more obvious can you get? It's on video. Their approach is on video. The interactions on video. And this guy died, and they didn't even have to face a trial. You know, so it's very frustrating, and the people are going to have to hold their politicians accountable and hold their police departments accountable. And I'm not going to even kid myself in thinking that there's a simple solution or a short-term fix. It's going to have to be a complete realignment in the entire thinking of how we police ourselves. And you know, in our free society, we're supposed to be policing ourselves. Well,
I'm gonna pause us right there, John, because the break's sneaking up on us. But you are correct. It's going to change. It's going to take a change of perspective to solve this problem. Not screaming and yelling and fighting. We'll be right back. Stay tuned. We are back, ladies and gentlemen. So before the break snuck up on us, we were discussing police brutality for the last few minutes of the first segment there with my guest tonight, my good buddy John Shirley. I like to call him the Sarge. Retired police officer. Former homicide detective. Somebody who knows what he's talking about, by the way, when it comes to policing and the attitudes of the police. Okay? Which you actually see in today's society that the attitudes of the police are a huge problem. Anybody with half a brain can see that. Anybody that takes 2 seconds out of their day to pay attention, not even to the news anymore. Like John said, you could just go to Facebook. You can go to YouTube. You could see it's out of control. I mean, people are getting shot. And by the way, it's not just black people. Again, and I'll let John pontificate on this too. That whole thing of it's just black people, that was done because what they did was everybody was starting to realize that police brutality was all the way across the board. Didn't matter if you were black, white, Latino, an old lady, or a young man. You could face the problem of police brutality. It could come into your life. This is now a reality. More and more people were realizing this. So the mainstream and the powers that shouldn't be, the mainstream media, their mouthpieces, had to go ahead and turn around and get everybody to believe that it was a race issue. Because that's easier to create a us versus them mentality, which you have. Because now you see, quote unquote, libertarians saying, well, you know, it was justified for them to use that stuff in Ferguson because those people were rioting. Some of these were the same people that 6 months before had a problem with MRAPs and the militarized police when the thought of them being used against them to come get their guns or force them to take things like a vaccine or something, then they had a problem with it. You see how quickly the narrative can get changed and twisted, and people, even if they're intelligent, will buy into it and fall for it? And then now the argument is about when it comes to police brutality, the argument isn't about are the cops out of control? Should they be shooting people's dogs? Should they be shooting people for not signing a parking ticket or a speeding ticket, which they've done? They've shot and killed people for not signing tickets. That's not the question anymore. Now the argument is police brutality is just against black people. It's not an issue for white people. It's not an issue for anybody else. That helps create division on so many levels. It helps to keep people from even looking into it because you're going to have some white people that'll be like, well, it doesn't affect me. I'm not black. The cops aren't going to F with me. So they don't even bother to think about it being a reality, even though it is a reality for them. Because they, the powers that shouldn't be, don't want you to realize what's going on. Because if you start to look into police brutality and you start to look into this whole problem with any semblance of logic, you're going to come to the same conclusion that, like John said, and like I have said 1,000 times on my radio broadcast, going head to head and fighting with these people in a violent sort of way is not the answer. That's what the powers that shouldn't be want, because that's the outcome they can control. What they don't want is people looking into the police brutality problem and saying, hey, I have an answer and a solution to this epidemic. How about we change the training and stop pumping the cops up on fear? How about that? Maybe that'll drop the cases of people getting shot for no reason and overzealous beatings and chokeholds like Eric Garner and everything else. That's how we're going to solve this problem, and they don't want that. So they have to change the argument. They have to change the narrative. They have to use logical fallacies, straw man arguments, red herring arguments. They have to do that kind of thing in order to get you to focus on them, on those side issues and those side non-real issues, the side non-arguments. Because then you're not focusing on the real problem that's right in front of your face. And it also stops people from coming together, because everybody was starting to realize that police brutality affects everybody, and suddenly now it's just a black problem. You see how quickly it can get kind of pushed off to one little segment of society? Don't pay attention to it. That's just blacks. They're the ones with the police brutality problem. That's the underlying tone there as well. More division, more separation, not realizing that we're all in this together. Anyway, I'm going off. I want to bring John back on because I want to get his take. It is about getting the guest to speak. So, John, your thoughts on everything I just said. Let's start with the change of perspective. Like you brought up a good point. Training is key, and we said this before on broadcast between the two of us. Your perspective on if we just changed the training, if we stopped pumping the police that are out there in the street up on fear, do you think, you've 20 years experience doing that job, do you think that do you honestly think, even with the lower level IQ people that they're hiring and some of the, I'm sure you've seen it in your own personal experience, do you think that things could change for the positive, like I say, or do you think that there isn't that hope with just that? There has to be more to it.
It would definitely take more than just training, but that's a good place to start. I mean, when I first came on the police department many years ago, there were never classes on terrorism. I mean, you could hardly get an advanced class on using your weapon. And now it seems like, ever since 2001, it seems like all the training is terrorism this, look under this rock that. And the whole deal is to keep the police in the constant mindset that there's going to be some guy that's going to run up and blow themselves up next to them. And it's such an unrealistic, argument to begin with. But when you fill people's minds full of that stuff, when you're talking guys who now have, 12 and 13 years experience, where their entire career they've been nothing but fed, inaccurate training. It's actually just going to get worse. And then when you roll that into something else we've talked about before, with so many of the recruits coming out of the military, and guys that have served 5, 6, and 7 tours in the military overseas in battle situations, they strap a badge on their chest and tell them to go out there and go police the public. After all the training that involves the terrorism stuff and the us versus them, the public hates you, and you've got to just stand up for yourself. You roll all that together, and it's just it's a powder keg. And I think we're seeing the results of a decade of that. And the training will be one thing. I mean, that's only one aspect of it. It's going to have to be a complete change from the bottom up. I mean, personally, I advocate a complete revision of the entire theory of modern policing. I think that departments want to talk about, we were a community policing organization, and they don't ever define that, and because they can't define it, because it really has no strong definition. And even though they say that, that's not what they do. They try to wrap post 9/11 modern policing with a pretty bow on it and call it community policing when it's anything but. So it's going to take a change in recruiting. It's going to take a change in training. It's going to take a change in the disciplinary process where your disciplinary issues are handled quickly and, your out-of-control cops are stopped after a first incident, not after 5, 6, 7 times. And there's just going to have to be a lack of patience by the public on, cops. They just they don't see themselves as the servants of the public. They truly are. If you go up to an officer and tell him or ask him what he thinks about the fact he's a servant of the community, most of them will probably laugh at you. When in reality, that's exactly how they should view themselves. They're truly there to serve the public, not to police the public, not to fine the public, not to be a revenue generating, machine. They're there to serve the public's needs. And I think that modern policing at its current iteration is a self-serving, beast that just wants to generate revenues and keep the people under control. And it's going to take a complete shift. I think it needs to start with a rethinking of what policing is supposed to be. As a free society, what does it truly mean to be self-governed and to be self-policed? And maybe it's time for us to get some actual representatives of normal society as your peace officers, and not what we have now. And I'm just a little pessimistic that that's ever going to happen, because I just don't see the government ever allowing that, because they want to wield the police as a tool of their power, and it's going to have to be taken that abuse is going to be taken away from the government. And I don't see how we're going to do it, but that's what it's going to take, because it's not going to reform from the inside.
Well, that's why, like I say, it's a change of perspective. If we change the perspective of the way that the people themselves, the police, are thinking, then, and I don't mean like some sort of brainwashing. I mean getting them to see that they are equal with us. They're not a special class of citizens. See, that's another part of the problem, which we can get into in a second. The whole idea that police think that they're a special class of citizenry, so that they're above the general public. And then it leads to this mentality, which then gets fed by the training that they're given. If they had a different perspective, that if everybody just realized that we were all equal, if everybody just treated each other better, it's actually a really simple, basic concept. But if we did so, things would change overnight. I mean, soldiers wouldn't be fighting wars if they said, "Nah, we're not going to go kill other people in their backyard in someone else's country just because you want us to. It doesn't serve me anything. It's just going to screw me up physically and mentally, and I'm going to kill somebody else for you." No, kick rocks. The same thing with police. If police weren't willing to beat their own and shoot and kill their own and do what they do to their own, then we wouldn't have these problems. And that is the only way that we're going to solve things. I mean, going into a violent revolution is what they want. The powers that shouldn't be want a violent revolution. Look at all the training, right? When you were a police officer, I'm sure you received training at one point or another for like crowd control and things like that. I understand if you're trying to calm people down and stuff, but it went from like basic crowd control techniques to now it's every cop is basically like a SWAT operator. Wouldn't you agree?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, back before 9/11, I actually was part of. By the way, I was a member of the Houston Police Department. I had actually never said that before, because I didn't want to upset the higher ups where I worked. But at HPD, I was actually on the riot control squad even before 9/11. It was a requirement if you worked in the downtown area, you had to be. And we trained, but to be honest with you, the shift that took place after 9/11 and the way that we trained was a night and day, and it became much more intensive. And in fact, I was selected to be on a super secret riot squad where we had like 10 times the amount of training as everybody else in the riot control stuff, and it just got real. It became the absolute focus of everything. And the funny thing is, there hadn't been a real riot in Houston since the early 1970s, but there was all this money getting dumped in by DHS to equip and train these riot control squad guys to handle, the tear gas grenade launchers and the pepper ball guns. And we used to have scenarios with mock protesters where we'd have to do mass arrest situations, and I was in that until probably about 2004, and I just couldn't do it anymore. I didn't like the way that it was going. I didn't like the way that through the training, I got the impression that they were looking to wield this weapon, and they were just itching and waiting for it. And it was a voluntary thing, and I unvolunteered for it. And I'm even since then, the amount of the riot control training has become, pretty much department wide. They went to issuing everybody gas masks and everybody Tyvek suits, and it's just right now being a cop in a major city, your part-time job is riot control and weapons of mass destruction, and that's just not the reality we really live in. It's not necessary, and I think it just goes further to widen that gap between your citizen police officer, your cop who's walking the beat and knows everybody by name and knows who the bad guys are before the stuff's even reported to the police, because they've got friends in the community that come and tell them what's going on. We're so far gone from that the police officers we have now, who even have 10 years of experience, they don't have any inkling idea what it really means to be an officer in your community. For the most part, you have your exceptions, but for the most part, the old school cop is a dead breed, dead and gone. For a long time, and without radical change, we're never going to get that back. And I just hope we can, because I consider the police the tip of the spear when it comes to what kind of power that our government wields around. And so, if we can get some officers educated and deprogrammed, we can make a difference on the street where it matters, no matter what the powers that be at the top want to do. Because if you don't have a cadre of officers who are willing to be, jackbooted jerks, well, then it doesn't matter what laws they pass or what ridiculous rules they kind of enforce. It all comes down to an officer on the beat. Is he going to be the one that does the ridiculous things they expect him to do? And if you've got guys who are willing to say, I'm not going to do that openly, or if you even have guys that say, I'm not going to do that, and just do it covertly, don't write all those tickets, that you think you have to, don't enforce, excise tax rules like they did on that guy in New York, and they killed him over excise tax on cigarettes. You just choose not to do that. Choose to be a good cop. Choose to enforce the natural laws out there. Choose to go catch your burglars and your rapists and your murderers and your hijackers. But put the ticket book down. Your job isn't to generate revenue. Your job is to serve the public. And the public as a whole does not want to be nickel and dimed, ticketed, and told. That's what it comes down to.
Your thoughts on the Eric Garner case? I wanted to ask you this before, but I know I wanted to cover this, but I want to take as much time as you want, because we got about 8 minutes before we got to go to break again. So, thoughts on the Eric Garner case? Because, like you said, they killed the guy because he was selling single cigarettes, and because they, basically it comes down to they killed him over a petty little tax of a couple cents.
I almost don't have words for it. From everything that I've read, the police had been harassing, Mr. Garner for a long time over petty things. Your case in point, what they killed him over, which was a cigarette tax that wasn't paid. So he had history, most likely, with these particular officers. And my memory, and granted, I hadn't watched the video in a long time because honestly, I can't watch it. It makes me sick to my stomach to watch it. And trust me, I was a homicide cop. Those things don't bother me, but watching them kill this man bothers me. And to imagine that this is going on over basically a civil offense, probably would have amounted to less than $1 worth of tax on some untaxed single-sold cigarettes, is just, it's disgusting. And the fact that it was on video, and the fact that the grand jury chose not to even indict them is just, it's maddening. And the thing was, when the grand jury verdict came down, and the news media wanted to go bananas and couldn't believe that this is the way that justice was handled in this situation. And I know from all my years on the department and knowing how the process is when you have an in-custody death or you have an in-custody or you have a shooting, that's business as usual. Things happen behind closed doors. Unfortunately, a lot of times it's a couple of questions to the officer, a wink and a nod, and they pat him on the butt and send him out the door back onto the street. That's how it goes. There's not ever a real in-depth look at it. And to expect that an agency is going to police itself when they have so much to lose, especially a department that's as generally heavy-handed as the New York Police Department, they weren't going to let their officers get spanked for that, because that would put a dent in their identity, because they run things there. And the only answer to this is public prosecutions. I mean, let them have their day in court, in open court, because even if, now I'm not saying that the guys who killed Eric Garner were justified, but even if the situation lent itself to it being justified, the public's not going to believe it, because to a sizable portion of the public, we no longer buy the BS that comes out of the mouths of the politicians. It kind of goes to the whole Ferguson thing. I think that officer probably was justified in what he did. I'm going to say probably. He was justified in what he did. But because the investigation and everything was done behind closed doors, nobody has any faith in the system. So it actually makes the problem much worse. But the governments, they want to keep things hidden because they want to be able to manipulate things. And I think that was the case. That was the case in Mr. Garner's situation, is that one way or the other, those guys were not going to leave that courthouse with an indictment.
Which is sick. That's disgusting, because, I mean, the cop, dude, he violated their own protocols with a chokehold. Right. So he violated their own protocols, and it ended up resulting in someone's death. And then my favorite part was, people like Representative Peter King, who, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, is an IRA terrorist. But this guy goes off about terrorists, but he's an IRA terrorist himself. But that's a whole side issue. This guy's sitting there saying he had the balls to go on mainstream media, John, and be like, well, it's Eric Garner's fault because he was fat and he should have just listened. He didn't do anything. He didn't even resist. They just jumped on him because he was a big guy. So by the way, just because cops say quit resisting doesn't mean you're actually resisting. Isn't that true, John? Isn't that one of their favorite things to throw out there?
That's what they consider, the catch-all. It's okay no matter what I do as long as I say quit resisting, because that means that the gloves are off. And so as long as they're screaming quit resisting, then even if you're not resisting, you can do whatever you want. And that's how you end up having things like Mr. Garner ended up being dead. And, the thing about, they violated their own policy with the chokehold. And, we're trained. There are times you can violate policy. Like for us at HPD, the basic rule was you can never hit somebody in the head with your nightstick or your ass baton, which is a very good rule. But it was also accepted that, if your life was actually in imminent danger, well then, basically all bets are off at that point, which just honestly makes common sense, because if you really think as an officer, you're about to be killed, it doesn't matter what the rule book says. Do what you have to do to subdue the suspect, okay, or get out of the situation alive. In the situation of Mr. Garner, he was passively resisting, and there's a big difference between active resisting and passive resisting. And, in an active resisting situation, yes, you can use force and use whatever force is necessary to effect the arrest. But in Mr. Garner's case, with passive resistance, there was no justification in any way, shape, or form to use a deadly chokehold. And the officer knew better, but he was gonna show this guy who was boss. And I haven't heard. Have you heard whether any of those officers actually lost their jobs or not? I didn't hear.
No, I don't think they did. From what I understand, they got off and they're out on the street. I mean, that's not going to stop the family from suing them in civil court. But don't most cops have insurance for that too? Because I know I know a few other police, and they've actually had to get insurance in case of something like that happening, that they were covered. I mean, do all police have to carry that type of insurance?
Well, in our department, I've never heard of an insurance policy against that. And the reason that is because, generally speaking, when you're working under the umbrella of your commission, the authority who you're working for basically has to indemnify you for lawsuits of what you do on duty, except in cases where you violate policy. And then they can separate from you, and you're being sued personally. And I think the funny thing about getting an insurance policy is I'm not sure that an insurance policy would pay out if they proved you were acting outside your scope of duty and outside your scope of procedure. So, the reality is, in these situations, when the family of someone who's been wronged by the police sues the police department, they have to sue the individual officer first to get to the police department. And who they want really to sue is the actual department of the city or the state or the county.
Because they're the ones that are. That's where the money is, and that's actually who's responsible. I'm going to pause this right there because the break's sneaking up. We can get back into this very same question on the other side. Ladies and gentlemen, do not go anywhere. Another hour. We're going to get into the war on drugs and a bunch of other stuff. Stay tuned. Ladies and gentlemen, we are back with hour number 2 here on tonight's live edition of Down the Rabbit Hole. I am your host, Popeye, from federaljack.com, talking with my good friend, retired homicide detective Sergeant John Shirley. I still like to call him Sarge, even though he's retired. It's kind of a respect thing, former military, former firefighter to another professional. And John was a peace officer. He wasn't one of these dickhead cops. He was actually a good one, and that's why I have respect for him. And he's my friend, so I like to show him a little bit of respect. Anyway, we're hanging out talking about police brutality, all the insanity. By the way, if you want to hear this archive, if you're hearing it on like Rebroad or whatever on YouTube and you want to download it, maybe you know someone that's a police officer, you want to say, hey, listen to what this cop has to say. You can find this and all the other conversations with a cop episodes that I've done with John over at federaljack.com/Popeye. Just scroll down, you'll see them, and download them, put them on a CD for somebody, put them on a thumb drive, whatever. Send them to them via Skype. However, let them hear what a fellow police officer, a peace officer, has to say about all this. Anyway, I want to get back into my question that I had asked John when we were going to break. I had asked him about insurance for cops, because I know a few cops in different departments that actually they were required to have a certain amount of insurance. I think it was liability insurance of some type. And I don't remember the exact details of it. And this was a while ago. So it could have been just a city thing. It could have been that specific department in that city. It could have been a requirement. That's why I asked John if all cops had to have this insurance. He said no. And he brings up a good point. Like, if you have to have that type of insurance, perhaps you maybe should rethink the type of training that your police department is being given. You know, if the cops have to have insurance for, well, oops, I killed somebody and I shouldn't have done that. Like, think about the fact that you actually need, like, it happens so often that you actually need insurance to pay out. Anyway, I had questions about that. I wanted to ask John about this, and I was going to do it off air. And I realized that I didn't want to have him repeat it, because it's more natural when the answers come the first time. And B, I think it would be beneficial for you, the listener, to hear a little bit of the inside baseball, so to speak, of behind the scenes, what happens if an officer does get sued. Since we're talking about police brutality and cops doing bad things, we're constantly focusing on the bad stuff they do. So let's focus a little bit on the mechanics of what happens if they actually do get sued. Okay, in the we'll use the Eric Garner situation just as an example. We're not saying that this is what's happening, but in the case of like those police officers, John, where they didn't get off, or they got off rather, they didn't get charged. There's no repercussions for their actions on the department side. If they get sued civilly, how does that get handled? I mean, would the people? I mean, obviously they would sue the police department, the officer, and everybody else. But does the officer? Like, I've seen in other cases where officers get sued. There's a couple cases where officers have a history of police brutality and abuse of their power, and they have 3 or 4 different lawsuits pending against them. So my question is, I guess it's like a multi-pronged one here, but A, does the city attorney, because I know the city has the attorney to cover, officers, I guess, if they're in their uniform in the line of duty, but how, and I guess it protects the city, really is what the city attorney's for, and I guess because they're police officers, they're an extension of the city's power, but how far does that protection stretch to the officer? Like, if the say Eric Garner's family wants to sue those cops, I mean, will the city actually defend the police? Will they provide an attorney? How does all that work?
It's a very complicated question to begin with, because you're dealing with attorneys in court, which we all know there's no justice in our court system, and whether that's the civil or the criminal. But usually what happens is, if an officer is sued and the city in their investigation finds that he violated a policy, and that policy violation was germane to the situation, then a lot of times the city will disconnect themselves from the officer and his actions, and he'll be left to defend himself. And normally in those situations, officers are part of a union, and most police unions are really just fancy legal defense organizations. I mean, I was a member of my union for the entire time I was a cop. But the main thing you get from that is legal representation in case you're sued or in case you're accused of a crime. So the city would disconnect themselves from the officer. The officer would be stuck on his own defending himself. But the city would still continue defending those that weren't necessary or didn't necessarily violate policy. If they were just standing around and got sued because their name was on a report somewhere, they'll still defend them. And a lot of times in these situations, what ends up happening is the officers themselves who are on the scene aren't the only ones that get sued. They usually will also sue their supervisors for failure to supervise, because that's another way they can get to the city or the municipality or the state or whatever. That's where they get to the deep pockets. Because failure to supervise is actually it's actually a very effective tool, because a lot of times when you have officers doing crazy stuff, illegal, criminal stuff, a lot of times there's no supervisors around, and because most of these officers wouldn't do things if their boss was standing right there. Now, some would, because some bosses are also crooked, but so that's one of the most effective tactics for people in the situations where they're wronged by the police department is, where was this guy's supervisor? Was he headed to the scene when he knew this was an escalating situation? Or was he, back at the station, working paperwork instead of being out there with his troops? So a lot of times that's how they go forward. And then, so many times these cases, they never go to trial because at some point the cities wear the people down or they decide just to settle out of court. But the guys who were breaking policy and probably should have gone to prison in the case of Eric Garner, most likely they'll be hung out to defend themselves, or their police union will hire or assign an attorney to them to defend them.
I would probably say that in the case of Garner, that cop will probably get sued civilly, and it'll probably be the police union. See, the police union is a big problem too. A lot of people think, like you said, well, it's just there for the help of, to protect the officer legally. But I also see the police unions a large part of the problem with the cops never get held accountable. Like the unions would have more credit if they actually, maybe made the process, I guess, maybe a little easier. Fine, if you want to have like a happy medium, maybe the unions could step in as the representative so the cop doesn't get savaged, right? But still, they should be held accountable. And if they kill somebody, they should be held accountable. In fact, I think cops should be held accountable to a higher standard. And I told you this when you were active duty too, that cops should be held to a higher standard than regular civilians. Because if they're going to walk around with the ability to take a civilian's life, or a fellow, because they're not military, a fellow civilian's life, and just kill them and get away with it like the way they are, then they need to be held to a higher standard when they do it. They need to, when I was over in Amsterdam, right, I asked some of my friends there, I said, what happens if a cop kills? I actually asked them this question because we got into the discussion of police brutality one night. And I said, what happens if a cop kills somebody here in the city? And they were like, oh, it's front page news. It's a huge deal. The cop gets investigated. And I said, what happens if they're found where the police officer was wrong? Does the officer actually get punishment, or do they just get off and get paid like a paid vacation for a couple of days? And they said and it was not at the same time. I asked this at separate times with separate people, and everybody gave me the same answer. So and some of these people didn't know each other. So unless they conspired to lie to me, okay, you know what I mean, in some grand conspiracy, and they already had forethought of the question that I was going to ask, which I highly doubt, you know what I mean, then it must be the truth. And they all told me that no, the cop would get investigated. It'd be all over the news. It's just not like that. I mean, John, I was in Amsterdam, which is like L.A., New York. I've been there multiple times, but for those of you that don't know, Amsterdam is like LA, Vegas, Miami, and New York, all rolled into one. Okay. Oh, and I guess Colorado, because there's lots of cannabis there, right? So we'll say Denver. So it's like all these cities rolled into one. There is by far more people from all over the world traveling through that city than I would say New York or Los Angeles, like tourist wise. Okay. You have not just people from like the Americas or whatever. You actually have people from all over Russia, everywhere. Okay, and you have these people coming and going and partying and getting drunk and getting in fights. I mean, they still get in fights over there, except the difference is how the police and the public actually handle it. I watched a fist fight break out, and I actually watched the general public that was walking down the street. Everybody stopped and watched what was going on. And when it got to they kept an eye on it. And as soon as it got to the level where violence was used and they started throwing blows and hitting each other, random guys walked up and separated these people and kept calming them down and kept them separated. And then when these guys broke free and started chasing each other down the street, a whole bunch of people started following them. It was just different interaction. It wasn't people weren't so afraid as they are here. And the cops, well, when the cops deal with drunks or people that are out of control, they didn't just immediately come over and beat the crap out of them, tase them, shoot them, whatever. They didn't do that at all. In fact, I watched the cops do – I rarely saw – you saw people getting arrested once in a while, but I rarely saw people getting arrested. Rarely. I saw people being, maybe given a talking to, whatever. The cops tell them you can't do this, knock it off, carry on. But just the whole attitude and the way the cops even hold themselves there is different. And it's not that we have that American John Wayne attitude. No, it's different. It's like you said earlier, John, the days of the cop when you and I were kids, because we're around the same age, the days of the police officer that was around the peace officer when we were kids, the beat cop, those cops are gone. I remember one of the local cops when I was like 17 years old catching me with a girl in the park behind my house at like 1 o'clock in the morning, okay, making out in the front of my pickup truck. And he pulls up and he without even reading my license, he's standing right by the window. I hear him. He tells the duty sergeant, who I happen to know, who's a friend of mine, he tells the duty sergeant what kind of truck he pulled over and that the guy's on the fire. It's got fire department tags on it. And he said, what's the last name on the license? And he told him. And he said, tell him to put it back in his pants and get out of there. Now, nowadays, they'd arrest the kids. And if the girl was 16 and the boyfriend was 17, he'd probably get charged with being a sex offender. I mean, it's just ridiculous in the mentality and the change over, even 20 years. Cops weren't cool when we were kids either. You always had that rebellion thing, their authority, but it's just different. It's a complete different attitude, completely. And I honestly don't think that, I think it's running a course. It's like anything else. I think it's running a course, and whether it can evolve into something bad or good, and it seems to be getting worse. I think we'd have to. I don't think that you can turn things around. I think you'd have to literally stop and just kind of wipe the slate clean and start over. I honestly think that's really the key is to start over. And I don't mean, again, violence or anything like that. There's other ways to do it. The first step is the change of perspective. That's kind of an umbrella thing, John, the change of perspective, I would say, because that entails not only training, because that's part of the perspective change, but the other part of the perspective change is the police not thinking that they're a special class. I'm sure that in your experience, have you not met officers that thought that they were above the average citizen?
Well, instead of saying, I think that mentality is really endemic in the subculture that is policing, and it honestly starts from the very beginning in their academy training. They basically tell you, you're set apart. You're not like everybody else. You're going to be a different person when this is all said and done. Your old friends are not going to be your friends. They I guess in a way it's very similar to mind control. They separate you out from other people. They put you through rigorous training. They put you through stressful situations with a new peer group. They indoctrinate you with hours and hours and hours of different things. And when they throw you out the other side, then you're stuck in a peer group where you're the know-nothing rookie, and you want to try so bad to be like the, seasoned officers, and you'll look the other way when things are done incorrectly. And a lot of times officers make the mistake of emulating, the bad things they see. So it's just like any other subculture, the police officers are a subculture, and the system furthers that belief, and officers themselves further that, and it's a reality, and it's breaking the subculture and reminding officers that they're just like everybody else. They're just wearing a suit. That'll be a big step in the right direction. A very pivotal experience that I had early in my career, and I mean really early in my career. I'd been on less than a year, and I was forced to ride with a older officer than myself, although he wasn't much older. He'd probably only been on for 3 or 4 years, and I was still in rookie mode. I was just wanting to just learn all I could, and I knew I didn't know anything about anything. And this officer, jacked this guy up, and basically ended up breaking his nose for no reason at all. And I was sitting in the passenger seat when this interaction was going on, and as I heard things kind of getting out of hand, I just froze. I was a 22-year-old kid, you know, and I didn't know what to do. And after this was all over with, this officer was like, "Hey, man, are we good?" Because he ended up letting the guy go after breaking his nose. He's like, "Man, are we good?" I said, "No, we're not good." I said, "Don't make me lie for you, because I won't." Well, needless to say, that was the last time I ever rode with that guy. And that was a very pivotal moment in my career. And I think it's probably realistic to say it's kind of one of the things that set me down, you know, the path that I took, you know, being a civil libertarian and, you know, respecting the people that I, you know, was assigned to protect. And, you know, I look back now and I have regrets that, you know, I didn't turn it in. But if I was put in the same situation as a rookie officer again, you know, would I have done things differently? I don't know. But it's that subculture that's built in. It feeds on itself. It's a feedback loop. And, you know, I didn't want to speak out because then I'd be that guy. And I would have been ostracized, and I may have been run out of the police department, to be honest with you. But getting officers out of that subculture would be a big step in the right direction. But breaking that subculture is going to be very, very hard, because the nature of the work feeds on you're different. You're the one that has to be over everybody else. You're the person that keeps society under control, and sometimes that means, you know, being a little heavy-handed. That's just the way that officers think. And you know, that's kind of, you know, not to be self-promoting, but that's, you know, one of the things that Oath Keepers really preaches is that, you know, if you really learn where as an officer you fit into the big picture as truly a guardian of people and a protector from not only other criminals but from, you know, out of control government. That's one of the reasons why Oath Keepers is so important, because it really does begin to break down that wall between officers and the people they serve. But yeah, that's really the first time I've ever told that story in public. But it was a pivotal moment for me, and one I'm not necessarily proud of, but a one that I would also say is not unusual for young officers who are exposed to that kind of stuff when they're fresh out of the academy.
Do you think that sometimes they're put with those guys purposely, like knowingly? The duty sergeant will put them with those guys purposely to get them seasoned and used to that. So it's almost like they start the programming early.
Yes. Yeah. I really don't have a whole lot to add to that, but yes, I do. I think it's not just coincidence.
It would make sense. I mean, if you're gonna get them, if you want them to partake in that same type of behavior, especially when they're the first couple of days, their brains are very, very malleable, and they're probably the most open and receptive they will be, because they haven't gotten tainted by the realities of the job yet. Then yeah, it would make perfect. Like if you think how these people think, it would make perfect sense. You know, according to their logic, if you want their outcome, I should say, then yes, it would make perfect sense to do that. And it's unfortunate, because then it becomes, like I've said before, the beauty of their plan is not that they have to sit and make officers sit in a classroom every day and, you know, repeat things like brainwash style. They kind of like when you guys gather in the morning and that you guys go over everything. Duty sergeant comes in, or whoever, the captain, whatever comes in, or lieutenant, and they go over everything for the day, or, you know, blah 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 during shift change and all that. But for the most part, the brainwashing comes from each other. It doesn't really come from, I mean, there is some from the higher ups, but it's the basic training that's given to you, and then it's encouraged for the people to engage in that behavior, and then it's just that behavior is condoned. So by them engaging in it, they're programming themselves, and then they're programming these newbies that see them engaging in this behavior that it's okay, and the higher ups don't do anything or get mad at it, and this is the way, however it is to go about it, and then it just perpetuates the problem. The beauty of the plan that the powers that shouldn't be have is they have us A, policing ourselves, and B, programming ourselves. They don't have to constantly program the police. They're doing it to themselves. It's compartmentalization. It just works its way down, on a downward slant. It's amazing to see, like, from a human psychology level. It really is amazing to see. I do have faith that things can get changed. Like, I don't want to say turned around, because that would mean that people would think we're going back to something. Things are going to be different no matter what. It's just, do we want a positive outcome or a negative outcome? And I think that the police maturing and realizing on a whole, not just as police, but as human beings, that they're equal with everybody else. See, that's the key. You know what I mean? Like, if everybody just realized that we're all equal, most of this stuff will stop tomorrow. That's the beauty of it. It's very simple. It's just actually getting people to actually see that, because of all their pre-programmed prejudices. We got only a few minutes before we go to break. When we come back on the other side, I want to get into the war on drugs with you in the last segment, and pick your brain a little bit about that. But my final thought for the police brutality is this, and then you can pontificate really quick before we go to break. If cops were held, John, to account, if police unions would have more respect, police themselves and police departments would have more respect if, when there was a bad cop and one that was doing bad things, they actually held him to account, and they did so publicly. If they did that and they held themselves to that higher standard, I really do think that they would gain some public respect back. Well, that, and they have to stop killing people for anything under the sun. We got about 2 minutes. Go.
Yeah, I mean, that's first and foremost, I want to say something about the police unions. I think it's a mistake that police unions are basically nothing but legal representation for officers. And so, to me, when you look at legal representation, when you hire an attorney, he's going to argue your side no matter what you've done or what you've said. Okay? So there needs to be a separation between a police union and police legal defense, because an attorney is going to defend you pretty much no matter what goes on. But a police union should do what's best for all their members. And I think those things are a lot of times mutually exclusive. And so it almost does police unions a disservice by lumping all that attorney representation in with them, because then the entire union is almost bound to defend the officer no matter what, because the union is the attorney is the union. Whereas if you had a separation, there could actually be reasonable expectation that the union is going to. I mean, the union can say when their officer is screwed up, and let's let the courts and stuff play out, versus an attorney who's going to argue that the killers of Eric Garner were, misunderstood or justified or whatever. So, you put that in its little hole, and then the cities they're going to defend their officers when it serves their political purposes, because it is politics. And as far as them winning back the trust of the people, that's a long, hard road. I mean, the people believe the crap coming out of the politicians' mouths for so long that we've just really very recently come to the point where we don't really trust them. So the idea they're going to win that back, it's going to be a long time, and it's going to take a sea change in the way that the governments handle when their police are out of control.
I agree, John. I agree. Ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned. Break sneaking up. We'll be back in 3 short minutes. We are back, ladies and gentlemen. Final segment, tonight's live edition of DTRH, hanging out with my good friend, Sergeant John Shirley. And before we get into the war on drugs, John wanted to bring up a couple mobile apps. I know there was one in particular he wanted to bring up, and then I had asked him if it was the one that the cops hate, and he said no, that was another one. So I'll have him get into that one too. John, what were the mobile apps that you wanted to recommend to the listeners?
First and foremost, I think what I want to say is, as a retired peace officer, I believe, looking forward in the future, I want to see a world where we have less cops. A lot less cops. there's no need to have as many officers as we have. I mean, where I live, I can't drive 5 minutes in any direction without passing a cop, and I think that's a very bad sign for a society that calls themselves free people. I don't feel free when I have my overlords wherever I go. That being said, if you take away the cops, unless you take responsibility for yourself and your community, there's going to be a vacuum. And a very much smarter guy than myself, and I don't remember his name right now, he developed an app called Peacekeeper. It's one word, and it's on the the iTunes store. It's on the Google or the Android store. The purpose of this app is it's basically a local community emergency response system. And so if you and your neighbors all have this app and something happens like a fire or an intruder or you need the police or something else, you hit a button on it and it notifies all your neighbors that something's going on, that you need their help. Because if you know anything about the police, generally speaking, by the time we get there, it's all over and done. All that's left is for the body bags and the ME's office to come clean up the blood. So this app enables communities to police and regulate and help each other instead of depending on big daddy government to do it for you. The only way it works, though, is if you get enough people involved where they can actually make a difference. So look up Peacekeeper. It's a great app. It was developed by a libertarian trying to think outside the box. I think he's done a good job, especially if it gets some traction. As far as the app that the cops hate, that's Waze, and it's a crowdsourced navigational app. And the cops hate it because part of the shtick with Waze is you alert other people to where the police are. And funny thing is, I use that app every single day, and I don't have any problem with it whatsoever. We're a free society. If I want to be able to report where the police are, it's no different than me getting on the phone and calling my buddy and telling him there's a cop on the road up there. So anyway, that's what I have to say about apps. But look up Peacekeeper and keep using Waze because it only works if everyone's doing it.
That's interesting. I didn't know that actually the community policing one. And I agree. Look, I have talked about on air before. People have said, "Well, if we got rid of cops, then what would you do?" Well, then you have volunteer fire departments. Why can't you have volunteer police departments? Why not? If the citizens themselves were the police in the city, and they actually were the ones out on the street doing the patrols, there would be less crime. There would be less beatings. I mean, the crime would be under control because people that live there know better about their city than people that live outside the city and come in to police it, like security guards in a warehouse. Because that's basically what modern day cops that live outside the city are. And I've said to you before, I think that a requirement to be a police officer in any city should be that you have to live within the city limits. That way, if you're a cop and you live there, you're less likely to beat the crap out of the people in the neighborhood that you're policing because chances are you live in said neighborhood and you're going to have to deal with those people when you're not in your uniform, and you're not walking around with your patrol car and, in your little costume. So I think you and I have had conversations about that and whether or not that should be a requirement. I want to read you something really quick. A good friend of mine from Miami, fellow activist, known him for a long time. He runs photographyisnotacrime.com. Carlos Miller, he's been on the broadcast before. You might know him. You might have heard of him. I
follow the site.
Okay, well, he just posted on Facebook a picture while we were on air tonight of a comment that somebody left on the site a couple months back. He just found it, and it says, "To those who created this website, I hope some thugs cut your throats and kill your stupid asses. Payback is a biatch. Most cops are good cops. All thugs are scum. Period. It's scum like you that get officers killed." Thoughts? That's a pro police supporter.
That's a pro tyranny supporter is what that is. As an officer, I never had any problem at all. So I wanted to videotape or photograph what I was doing. If I was doing my job and honoring my oath, I should have no worries at all about being photographed. And it just drives me absolutely insane that in 2015 you have people being arrested for photographing and videotaping police officers. absolutely insane. As far as I'm concerned, if you're an officer doing what you're supposed to be doing, anybody videotaping or photographing what you're doing is nothing but going to help you in the end if something goes wrong. Because if you're doing the right thing, that's going to be able to be great evidence of what was done correctly and how maybe a screwed up situation we brought into more clarity. So once again, I almost have no words for officers that try to arrest people for photographing or videotaping them. It's insanity. And something I want to bring up, and this may be a good segue into the war on drugs discussion, is that I feel there needs to be a very, very definite line in police work and really in society as a whole between what's considered a misdemeanor and what's considered a felony. And this also leads back to kind of the discussion of policing ourselves, because any person, any citizen can make an arrest for a felony offense and citizen's arrest. Everyone can do that. Now, the difference is police officers can make arrests for misdemeanors, which are lesser offenses. And I personally believe that officers in the last 50 years have been taught you arrest as many people for as many crimes, as no matter how serious or how petty they are. I think so many times officers get in trouble, enforcing misdemeanor law. It puts them at odds with the public and leads to more complaints and more physical altercations in situations where an arrest is not really necessary. Because I believe that an arrest for a misdemeanor offense should be the exception to the rule and not the rule. And so if officers would take it upon themselves to concentrate more heavily on policing the felony offenses and only making arrests in misdemeanor offenses when it's absolutely necessary, I think it make a big difference in the perception of the police in the long run. Part of this was kind of brought to the forefront very recently when, after the two New York cops were murdered in a patrol car, the officers on NYPD, because they were mad at de Blasio, stopped making arrests and writing tickets. And the quote that came out from, I guess, the police union was they were only making arrests that they absolutely had to. My response to that is that should be every arrest you make. You should only take somebody's rights and freedoms away which you absolutely have to. And so to think that this was the exception to the rule, it took something extraordinary to change, so we're only making arrests when we absolutely have to, it shows just how off track modern day policing is. We shouldn't go and seek to remove people's rights and to detain them. We should do everything we can to increase freedom. So you only take somebody's rights away if it increases somebody else's freedom, and if they're impinging on somebody else's freedom. So that's kind of, if I was going to look forward to how you start fixing the policing problem in this country, that would be a large step in the right direction. And that kind of leads to, I guess, the war on drugs.
Which is a huge problem in and of itself on so many levels. We don't have enough time, obviously, to tear it apart the way we'd like. And John's going to come on more often now that he's got some more time. We're going to work it out like once or twice a month. He's going to come on, and we're going to have episodes where we just specifically get into things in a little bit more detail, which will be fun. But for the rest of the segment, I want to tear apart the war on drugs with you. First of all, I always say this, I have to give you credit for not being one of these drug warrior cops during your career, and it's not because, I'm sure you didn't have the opportunity, but I know that you purposely held yourself to a higher standard while doing your job. And that's the kind of attitude we need. Okay, that's for the listeners, that's the kind of attitude that you'd want. You don't want somebody that's willing to do whatever they're told. You want quite the opposite. You want a bit. What did they used to call you? The anti-cop, right? Isn't that what they call you?
Yeah, the uncop.
The uncop. Honestly, I think you should wear that one with a badge of honor, personally. But anyway, the war on drugs. So one of the things I want to throw out there first is, with the war on drugs comes this, and of course the war on terrorism, but especially the war on drugs, comes this no-knock warrant crap, where they kick the doors in at 3 o'clock in the morning. And the reason they say they do this is because, element of surprise, they don't want people flushing the coke down the toilet, right? Well, I understand there goes your evidence and all that, but the problem with that is with the no-knock warrants, and we've talked about this a lot, John, is the fact that when they do these no-knock warrants, they come in at 3 o'clock in the morning dressed with ski masks, and they kick doors in, and they're coming through windows. If if you're coming in my window at 3 o'clock in the morning with a ski mask and no identifiable thing that says police, I'm shooting. And to be honest with you, really, even if you have a thing that says police on you, how the hell can you be sure in this day and age that that person's really a cop, considering you can go on eBay and buy uniforms and stuff that say police, or you can go on any of these websites, you can go on Galls or any of these other emergency services websites and stuff, and you can buy stuff. So I mean, you can get stuff easily on the internet. You could dress up and pretend to be a police officer and break into someone's house at 3 o'clock in the morning. So a little bit of common sense. What makes these cops, John, think that it's intelligent to come through someone's window at 3 a.m. wearing a ski mask? Because then these guys get shot in the face, and then you hear, oh, the poor officer, he was shot by this horrible gun owner. But it turns out when you read the story that the guy wasn't even the right house. They were breaking into the wrong house, and the guy 3 houses down were who they wanted, but they broke into this dude's house and unannounced, not wearing any uniforms, nothing, ski masks. I'm not kidding. They wear ski masks. Okay. What are you guys, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that someone coming in someone's window at 3 a.m. with a ski mask is going to be viewed as a bad thing. Okay, geniuses? It's not that hard. I mean, use your head. And they wonder why these cops get shot. And a lot of times it's cops that are just regular detectives, or, they may be in a squad or whatever, but they're not even like specifically SWAT operators. I mean, sometimes you have the SWAT team coming in too, but a lot of times it's just these cops that are, they're detectives. There was a case where one detective got shot in the face coming through some guy's window at like 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. And I think the jury let him off, if I remember correctly, because they were wearing ski masks. They didn't identify themselves as cops until after the cop had gotten shot in the face. So how was the guy supposed to know it wasn't a criminal? And I bring this up in the war on drugs because this is one of their favorite tactics with the war on drugs, is the no-knock warrant. So as a former police officer and a free citizen of this country, and a human being with more common sense in his pinky finger than most people I know have in their entire body, what do you think about the whole craze of no-knock warrants and ski masks and not identifying themselves at 3 a.m.?
Well, I think it's insanity. In this day and age, thankfully, the Second Amendment's made a real big resurgence. So the incidence of guns in the hands of law-abiding citizens has gone up to maybe match the incidence of your thugs who are going to have guns regardless of what the law says. So to me, it just defies logic that I would want to go bang down your door in the middle of the night, whether I'm wearing a ski mask or not, banging down anybody's door. If they're a criminal involved in a criminal enterprise, they're going to shoot at you. If it's me in my bedroom and someone's breaking down my door because they got the wrong address, you know what? I'm going to shoot at you. So it's absolute insanity for something that's, I don't care what drug you name. There's no justification for putting individual officers' lives, innocent people's lives who may happen to be in a related to a drug user or drug distributor or whatever. There's no justification for putting officers and citizens and civilians in situations where you've got masked, armored up, who knows what, bashing down a door. And it doesn't matter if you're yelling it's the police, because, the incidents of guys getting hijacked by cops wearing fake uniforms or fake badges happens every single day in this country. So I think it's crazy. And to be honest with you, at least in my jurisdiction, the instances of no-knock warrants in our jurisdiction has gone down tremendously. I didn't hardly even hear about it, and personally, I think it's because of the prevalence of firearms, both legal hands and criminal hands. But to me, it's a crazy practice. There's nothing in the quote unquote war on drugs that would justify putting everybody in such a harrowing situation. Putting people inserting themselves in a violent situation in what's really not a violent crime, the actual act of having a stash house, not a violent crime. So it just makes no sense, and it's bad policy, and it's honestly bad procedure. There are better ways to go about it.
I don't understand
how I had to run felony.
I don't understand how they think that the cops aren't gonna get shot breaking into someone's house at 3:00 in the morning. Like, you should, just for a second, to the people that make these policies, how would you react if someone came in your house at 3 a.m. wearing a ski mask? There you go. You know what I'm saying?
It just makes no sense. And to expect both criminal and non-criminal to not shoot back is just a fundamental lack of understanding about self-protection. Because if you're a criminal, you're going to protect your criminal enterprise. If you're not a criminal, you're protecting your house and your family. So it's one of those policies that you got to wonder how it ever became okay. At what point did the police commanders and the judges and the district attorneys, at what point did they all say, hey, this is a really good idea, let's do this? I don't even see how that ever came to be, that was accepted. And to think that it's going on still today is it just makes no sense. And once again, I think we need to turn policing on its head when it comes to enforcing drug crime, just like it needs to be turned on its head for how they police the community. Modern policing is an absolute failure, and it doesn't take more than looking around and looking at crime trends, overall crime trends, to realize that it's an absolute failure. I mean, I read an article just a couple of days ago about how the cartels are basically whining and crying because they can't sell their crap weed anymore in the United States because of all the legal weed in the states that have legalized it or made it available for medicinal use. And they're whining and crying because the price of weed has crashed and they can't make any money off of it anymore. So now what do? They're going to turn to the next illegal drug. So now it's going to be heroin, apparently. So, you take the profit motive out of a drug like marijuana, like they have in so many states. And you know what? All of a sudden the cartels want nothing to do with it. Well, why don't we use some pretty simple logic and apply that to a lot of things and see if we could take the profit motive out of it for all the cartels?
And look, if you see them crying that they don't have any money, they're obviously... So the argument against legalizing it, oh my God, the cartels will just take advantage of it. No, look, they're pissed. If it makes them unhappy, something's being done right. Because the only thing that makes them happy is making tons and tons of money doing what they do, which is smuggling drugs and peddling their crap. And you're right. Now, when I was in the Coast Guard, I always joked that we were quality control. Because we didn't stop any of the good stuff. You know what I'm saying? And you know what I'm talking about. We didn't stop the good stuff, dude. We were stopping dirty brickweed from South America and the Caribbean. Garbage. We were quality control. We kept the crap out so that people had to buy from the home growers. So isn't that technically helping the economy? If you think about it, John. So it's the way I like to look at my service. Because at first I was go on.
I saw some interesting articles recently that the up and coming sectors for cartels are, number one is human trafficking, and number two is actually trafficking in stolen oil and gasoline from the government controlled oil pipeline system down in Mexico, which also begs the question of prohibition all the way around. You know, if the cartels are turning to human trafficking as their next big quote unquote cash crop, you know, what does that say for other types of prohibition? You know, we're basically creating a profit motive in all segments of, you know, what could be argued as victimless crimes. And so they just turn to other ones, other policies we have, and they're going to turn to that and make money off that. So it's a complete wrong-headed way of thinking that our government has with most things.
Going after the drugs and thinking that stopping the drugs is going to stop the cartels, by them switching to human trafficking just goes to it proves that argument wrong. It kills it, literally. Because look, they're going to do other sorts of illegal activity. So it's not really the problem isn't the drugs. The problem is the people doing all the selling and the running of the cartels and the killing and all that. They're the problems. We got about 4 minutes left, John, before the end of the broadcast here. I want you to take a couple minutes. Is there anything that you'd like to plug? Any websites? I know you're a member of Oath Keepers, but is there anything else that you'd like to throw out there?
Other than Oath Keepers, I'm also a member of LEAP, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. It's a very important organization. I encourage any officers that are listening or lay people that are listening, look into it. They've been around a long time, and honestly, I think they've actually started to turn the tide on a situation. Other than that, I'm a proponent of the Libertarian Party. I would like everybody to look into that. Don't be stuck in the Republican and Democrat cycle that they throw us in, that in the end we always end up in the same place. Just depends on who has a letter behind their name and how fast we get there. That's about it. No more plugs. Just want officers out there to make reasonable decisions and don't follow rules blindly. Don't be afraid to question rules, question orders. Educate yourself on what the true meaning of the Constitution is. Educate yourself on really what the entire concept of self-government, and so that's what's important to me. And we're gonna hopefully win this. It's gonna be a long fight ahead, but I have faith there are still good Oath Keepers out there who have never even heard of the Oath Keepers organization. People like myself, before Oath Keepers was formed, who knew that the way they were being trained and the way they were being pushed by their leaders was not really the way it's supposed to be. So I put it on each individual officer out there to educate yourself and to do the right thing. Treat every person who you have an interaction with as if they were somebody that you loved and were near and dear. Would you do that to your grandmother? Would you do that to your mother? And that's the way we're going to make a change. You're going to have to change the hearts and minds of the police officers. And then maybe down the road we'll actually get into decreasing the size of police departments and really reclaiming the freedom that we haven't had for 100 years in this country.
That's one of the reasons that they have they hire cops with lower IQs too, so they don't even bother to think on this level. They just do what they're told. They're like robots. And I think you're right. Everything you said is spot on, 150%. I couldn't have said it better myself, really. John, we only got about a minute left. I want to thank you, dude, for coming back on tonight. I know that you're a very busy man, and even though you're retired from policing, you already have another job, and you work your ass off all day long. So I want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart and from the listeners. We appreciate your time. Seriously, I'm going to be getting you back on. We'll talk off air about getting you back on, and I'd say at least once or twice a month, and we can get into some interesting topics. And I want to get your take on a lot of stuff, especially from an investigator standpoint. So again, thanks for coming on, brother. I appreciate it.
Well, I look forward to it. I think there's a lot of topics we can cover that I think my perspective and your perspective together will really kind of dig underneath the surface and really maybe open some eyes on some things that we've been led to believe.
I wholeheartedly agree. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are out of time. it sucks. I wish I had another hour. I want to pick John's brain a little bit more on a few other topics from the war on drugs. But as I said, him and I are going to do specific shows where it's just like the war on drugs, even if it takes 2 or 3 shows to get into it. It's the beauty of him being retired. We have a little bit more time, a little bit more freedom now. We are out of time. John, I'll hit you up off air. Stay tuned. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll see you again Thursday night. And stay tuned for the Rundown Live, guys. 3 short minutes, and then Mike and Chris Don will be on. I'm sure they'll rock your world with some interesting topics. And stay tuned for Joe Joseph tomorrow night.